So, what if I told you that our modern scientific way of thinking, with labs and equations, isn't the only smart way to understand the world? Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea from the great anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, something he called the savage mind. Just think about that for a second. Our whole world is basically built on a very specific kind of science: white coats, controlled experiments, complex math. We lean on those tools to figure things out. So, what happens when you take all of that away? What kind of knowledge can you possibly build then? For a very, very long time, the Western world's answer was pretty blunt. You just can't. The assumption was that without our specific tools, thinking stays kinda, primitive. That it's all about practicality, tied only to your next meal. It was seen as humanity's intellectual childhood, a stage you have to go through, but one you're supposed to grow out of. But then, in 1962, this French anthropologist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, publishes a book that was like a shockwave through the academic world. He basically argued that we'd been missing something huge, something profound, a completely different but equally powerful way of understanding the universe. Okay, so let's dig into this old, flawed portrait that Lévi-Strauss was so fired up about dismantling. To really get his argument, you first have to understand the myth of the so-called primitive mind. For the longest time, the thinking was split into these two columns. Over here, you've got the primitive mind, supposedly obsessed with concrete, useful things, basically governed by the needs of the stomach. And over here, you have the modern mind, capable of big, abstract thoughts, driven by pure intellectual curiosity. And listen, this wasn't just some vague prejudice. This was a view held by serious researchers. I mean, look at this quote from the ethnographer Krauss. The idea was simple. If it's not edible and it's not going to kill you, it's not worth naming. It just reduces an entire way of seeing the world to simple utility. But is that really what's going on? Lévi-Strauss looked at that exact same evidence and saw something totally different. He didn't see a lack of curiosity, he saw a ton of it. And this is where his argument gets really, really interesting. He asked a really simple but incredibly powerful question. Is all this meticulous attention to the world, all this naming and classifying, is it really just about finding the next meal? Or could something deeper be happening? And his answer was a complete game changer. He argued that this way of thinking isn't just about survival at all. It's driven by a powerful intellectual need, what he called a genuine appetite for objective knowledge. It's a fundamental desire to know, to classify, to understand, just for the sake of it. And that is the key. This is a theoretical pursuit, not just a practical one. It's about wanting to grasp the entire intricate web of life for the sheer intellectual satisfaction of it. In other words, it is its own form of science. So, okay, that's the theory. But what's the evidence? Well, when you actually start to look at the data, the sheer scale of this knowledge is absolutely mind-blowing. It's like discovering a massive hidden library out in the wild. Let's take the Hanukinu people of the Philippines. Their vocabulary for plants has nearly 2,000 distinct terms. Now, to put that in perspective for you, the average English speaker knows maybe, a few dozen plant names? This is way beyond just tree or flower. We're talking about an incredibly detailed system of classification. And it doesn't stop with plants. Nope. They classify 461 different types of animals. And inside that category, they have 75 distinct classifications just for birds. 75! Can you even imagine being able to identify 75 different kinds of birds just by how they sound or the way they fly? Or how about the Pinatubo negritos, another group in the Philippines? They can identify at least 450 plants, 75 birds, and, get this, 20 different species of ants. 20! Most of us just see, ants. They see a complex world of 20 different little societies right there at their feet. And we're not just talking about a long list of names. This knowledge is incredibly specific. The Pinatubo can tell you about 15 different species of bats, where each one lives, how they behave, whether they like to sleep in palm fronds or banana leaves or hollow trees. That is a deep, systematic, ecological understanding that can only come from generations of just watching, really, really carefully. There's this fantastic story from an anthropologist, E. Smith Bowen. When she showed up to study a tribe in Africa, her language lessons didn't start with hello or goodbye. They started with her hosts bringing her armfuls of plants, hundreds of them, and naming every single one. They just assumed she'd be as fascinated by it all as they were. And this quote from her just says it all. It was this huge moment of realization for her. She was in a world where a child's basic knowledge of their environment just completely dwarfed her own. To them, her ignorance wasn't a cultural thing. It was just unbelievable. They couldn't wrap their heads around someone not knowing the world in that much detail. So, what do you even call this incredible, systematic way of knowing the world? Because this isn't just random trivia or folklore. Lévi-Strauss gave it a really powerful and, I think, perfect name. He called it the science of the concrete, and it's a mode of thought that he argued is every bit as logical and rigorous as modern science. But here's the difference. Instead of starting with abstract principles, it builds its knowledge from the ground up, from the meticulous observation of the tangible, sensory world all around us. You can kind of think of it like this. Modern science often works top-down, right? It starts with an abstract idea, a hypothesis, and then it tests it against reality. The science of the concrete works bottom-up. It starts by observing thousands of specific details. This leaf, that bird's call, the texture of this soil. And from all that, it builds a complete, holistic picture of a very specific world. And this idea isn't even as new as you might think. Even the great French novelist Balzac, writing a whole century before Lévi-Strauss, he noticed this incredible thoroughness. He observed that when so-called savages move from an idea to an action, the result is just utterly complete, because every single angle has already been thought through. So here's the final powerful takeaway. The science of the concrete isn't a primitive warm-up act for our science. It's not a stepping stone on the way to something better. It is a parallel path to knowledge, equally valid, equally complex, and in its own way, totally brilliant. And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? If we can recognize this one hidden science, you have to wonder, what other incredible, complex systems of knowledge are hiding in plain sight all around us, just waiting for us to see them for what they truly are?